Okay, comrades, I want to start off by, thank you very much. I want to start off by saying that the racist backlash in Woolwich was on a much greater scale than after 7/7. I remember after 7/7 being concerned about it. You know, when you think about it, over 50 people were killed, 500 were injured, and the images that went out, what you'd expect was, there were sporadic attacks, but nothing on that scale. The situation in Woolwich was far worse. The police reported 7 days after Woolwich, there were 15 attacks on mosques, 240 Islamic attacks, and this Friday we saw that bomb that went off in Tipton, which it was planned to take place in the middle of Ramadan, and they got the timing wrong, mainly probably because they're Nazis, so do you know what I mean, in that sense. And I think that really, when we looked at it, I remember that day heading down to Woolwich. I must say that when you saw the pictures on television, the idea of a big black guy standing with a knife covered in blood over a white soldier was not one that was edifying, comrades, and filled you with the idea that it was going to be an easy day. And I went down there, and then suddenly what you found was there were 13, I would say, that you saw that weekend, the EDL went on the rampage. I went down to the mosque to talk to people. There were 1,000 people inside the mosque, and they were talking. One person simply said to me, I said to them, why is there so many people here? And people said, we're scared to go home. That was the mood. That's the truth. That was the mood at that particular time. And the EDL went on, tried to benefit from that. You saw them get 1,400 people joined the EDL demonstration in Newcastle. 1,000 on the, demonstrated outside the cenotaph. This was the biggest protest they had for 2 years, and I thought more or less we'd actually be able to push them back in the background. And I think the truth was, faced with that over that weekend, all the newspapers were filled with the idea that the fascists were going to take and were going to make an easy breakthrough. And you saw Tommy Robinson on everything, Radio 4, the television screens were poisoned with Nazis on our screens. And that week, they organised 34 demonstrations, promising 55 demonstrations in different towns. And I want to say that UAF organised 34 of the counter-protests. They were magnificent. I was proud to say that all the people stood up against the threats of the EDL and said, you're not going to walk through our town and intimidate people and build an organisation that will threaten people. There's only 2 that they outnumbered us, and that was in Sheffield. No, sorry, I better be careful what I say. You can hear the Sheffield comrades. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there's only 2 that they outnumbered us, and in Sheffield, on that day, 800 people blocked their route, and I got a text inside from the EDL and said, how dare you, people in Sheffield wanted to march on that day and you didn't let them. Good, that's true. There was a report from an organisation called MAMA, which organises racist attacks on Muslims, and it found out some interesting things. It found that 70% of the online links came from the far right, so it's definitely been organised by the fascists. Of the online link, the majority of them were linked to the EDL rather than the BNP. 49% of the cases of the attacks were carried out by EDL members. And really, what you see is that the EDL is the only far-right organisation that was key for doing that. But we have to, when you look at the backlash, you have to explain why wasn't the where did it come from? And I would argue that if you look in Britain at the moment, you've seen the rise of Islamophobia since 7/7. You've seen it actually backed by the highest forms, everywhere. Take, for instance, David Cameron's attack on multiculturalism. You see, Enoch Powell did a very similar thing in 1968 when he talked about rivers of blood, but Enoch Powell was sacked. Here you have a Prime Minister endorsing ideas saying that Muslims have separated themselves. And actually, I'm sick and tired of reading in The Sun that Ajam Chowdhury is the biggest danger in Britain. Every day, every day, there's a picture of a Muslim with a beard saying this is the biggest problem that we face. And actually, what you've seen actually embedded in society, I think, is an attempt to run attacks on Muslims, but also on migrants. So you've seen an increase, I believe, in scapegoating. You've also seen the economic crisis, to be honest. When you go to, I went to a meeting in Bransholme, and somebody asked me to speak there about something called the bedroom tax that was taking place there. And you saw people get up and say, why are they giving our houses to... Bransholme's in Hull, by the way. It's a huge estate. And they said they were giving them to migrants. One of the arguments came up locally was the houses were going to go to migrants. And because of economic pain, actually scapegoating can begin to make sense to people. And I think part of that is that's what we've seen take place. And then, I mean, there's already been a meeting on UKIP, but you've seen the rise of UKIP. You know, this idea, there's a man called Nigel Farage. I mean, even his name, there's nothing, but his name's French, actually. It's a Huguenot name, do you mean? But nevertheless, he says he's against himself 2 generations ago, or whatever he's against. He's against all migrants, right? And you really, what you see is UKIP's it's not a fascist party, it's a racist populist party. It tries to, it uses scapegoating as a way of building. But nevertheless, what you see is the impact of organisations like UKIP. When you see Farage go on television and say, I'm saying the things that people don't want to hear, and then other politicians not challenge them, Diane Abbott said at our conference, UAF conference, that she was very worried that the agenda was being set by these people and not being set by people in the Labour Party in terms of challenging what's causing the economic crisis. In other words, it pulls the whole agenda to the right, and the beneficiaries of this would be the EDL and the BNP. I want to argue that the ideology of fascism, which we're witnessing across Europe, there's some dark clouds in terms of the impact of austerity and the polarisation that's going on. I always mistake this quote. There's a poet, you know, with the centre cannot hold. Do you know what I mean? What's his name? Educate me. Yeats, yeah? I always get that wrong. All right? It's not because I'm not educated, but the point is, he says the centre cannot hold, right? And he talks about polarisation taking place. And actually, what you're starting to see, yesterday there was a brilliant meeting by Petros up on this platform, explained the growth of Golden Dawn inside Greece. You know, the idea that you have fascist parties in Greece, a country that was occupied by the Nazis, a country that had a military junta, in which there's a great big, but you've got mass opposition, that's what he showed. But the fact that you've seen there is a sign of the growth of the crisis. To be honest, in France, you've got the Front National getting 18% of the vote. And when Marie Le Pen came to this country and she wanted to speak at the Cambridge Union, the amount of people that said, we have to listen to what she's got to say. Somebody who says that Muslims praying on the street is the same as the Nazi occupation of France, the same as sending thousands of Jews to their death from France, says that's exactly the same. And people say we've got to listen to. I'm glad that we have a policy of no platform, actually. We said we had a no platform, but I'm glad that the students demonstrated outside there and said we're standing in front of you and opposed Marie Le Pen being able to go in. And also in Eastern Europe, organisations like Jobbik. And part of the problem is the idea of fascism or fascist is just used as a term of abuse. I mean, even like you're a fashion fascist, or I mean, literally, you've got people, totalitarian leaders are called fascist. And what it does, I think that, you know, I mean, so I remember Stuart Hall talking about authoritarian populism and saying the danger of fascist creep into Britain. It's a wrong, people don't know who Stuart Hall is, do they? Sorry, he was a leading, sorry, not many hands go up. I'm sorry, I'm showing my, when I was at college, and that's a long time ago, apologies. But basically, people say Margaret Thatcher. Do people remember her? Well, that Margaret Thatcher was a fascist. Margaret Thatcher wasn't a fascist. I'm glad she's dead. But I would say this, that because what she brought, she was a racist, and what she stood for was, you can't just say things that you don't like are that. I think the Marxist term for that is the development of particular groups of people, movements that developed around Mussolini in the 1920s, Germany in the 1930s, movements that had a distinctive impact in terms of what they want to do. They want to smash all forms of democracy. And actually, when to be honest, anybody who's had you've gone onto an EDL demonstration and you want to see what fascism looks like, you go to Stoke when they're on the rampage, right? And when people say that Nigel Farage is the same as the EDL, when we went to Stoke, I remember a police officer going up to them to say, it's not very kind to demonstrate. You've got to demonstrate over there, and you've got to demonstrate over there. They beat her up in front of me. Then I thought maybe this demonstration might not go the way we thought. Right? But they beat her up in front of you. Fascism wants to bring a brutal thing to smash the working class, I thought, and smash any form of opposition. If they do that to a woman police officer, what were they prepared to do to us? And I think that's different from then. The key difference between fascism and other totalitarian movements is what Leon Trotsky, the great Russian revolutionary, who was the first to notice the key differences between fascists and other traditional forms of authoritarian rule. He saw that fascists had a dual strategy of participating in democratic politics while organising terror gangs to smash and attack the left. The arditi di combattimento, the formation of squads that went round attacking and beating up people and smashing their right to organise, says what they're about. The attack of the EDL on the Unite buildings, about smashing and intimidating people, the planting of bombs. That's their method in terms of doing that. And where do they come from? Because in the past, or before, we're talking about specific growth of people. The ruling class could always depend upon the police and the army to put down revolts. But we only have to look inside Egypt what happens when the police, well, I better be careful how I'm explaining this, but when a revolution comes, the police and the army can't always be trusted at all in order to put down a revolution. With the rise of capitalism, you can have huge demonstrations in cities in which they couldn't put down, mass movements. And really and also the fact that lots of working class people around the world started to get the vote. So older forms of counter-revolution became less effective. The police were outnumbered. Sometimes the army would mutiny. So really what you start to see is when the middle class go into crisis, they have a different response to economic crisis. Mainly, people who are the middling sort of people, they're not the ruling class, they're not the working class. Actually, most of their concept is on self-advancement as an individual. How do they gain small property? How do they gain their lives? And the way of usually doing that is in terms of small shopkeepers. Take somebody like Tommy Robinson. I'm sick and tired of him being described as a working class, because it's all sociological, isn't it? How does he dress? He wears sports clothes, so he must be working class. Tommy Robinson runs a tanning shop, right? Typically petty bourgeois. I used to joke that he wants to get black, do you know what I mean, in terms of the fact that he has a turnover of 300. He used to say, I was doing very well until the crisis. I had a turnover of £300,000. It's a bit dodgy, those kind of shops in selling goods that, I won't go into that might be libelous, but you can guess what I think that his real occupation was. Do you know what I mean? But nevertheless, he was a small businessman of a different type. But nevertheless, that's essentially, he's not, but in times of crisis, these people can become rabid. That's what happened in the 1930s inside Germany. People that had saved all their life for their pension suddenly saw it go pop. If you look in Greece, suddenly people losing 50-60% of their livelihood, losing their house. I remember I knew somebody who was a university lecturer, said that he was 45 at the time, and he had a whole house, and he had to move back in with his parents. Do you know what I mean? That's enough to, I suppose it's enough to make my parents rabid if the idea I move him back instantly and stuff, let alone the drive that must have, the idea that you have this expectation you're going up in society, all these aspirations, and they're smashed to pieces. The truth of it is, the bourgeoisie, if you notice what's happening in London to the housing prices, there's a crisis on, isn't there? But they're buying bigger and bigger and bigger houses, aren't they? Because even though there's a crisis, they've got vast reservoirs of money. But people in the middling bit can lose, and they can be hit hard. Of course, working class people are hit by that, but they're not hit in the same way. And also, we've got unions, organisation which can fight back, that can put limits in terms of the attacks on austerity. The aim of fascism is to, as Trotsky put it, turn worms into dragons. An idea of the small person doesn't have it. And this is how Trotsky put it. He said, fascism unites and arms the scattered masses. Out of human dust is organised combat detachments. It is thus gives the petty bourgeois the illusion of being an independent force. So these people marching on the street, shouting, these are our streets, we go where we want. You see that in terms of the early brown shirts, you see those kind of movements. It says Trotsky says it turns worms into dragons. It draws the middle classes into a kind of promised orbit that is neither capitalism or socialism. When you read some of the stuff the EDL come out, the BNP, it's not only that they attack working class, they attack migrants, whatever, they also attack the nature of what's wrong with society. They talk about the difference between rich and poor. I'm just an ordinary person who's not been listened to the people in above. And therefore, part of that is they set up reaction. I want to talk about the difference between the BNP and the EDL, the different strategies, but they're the same beast. And it's important that we understand what we're dealing with. I want to return back to my first point about the nature of fascism and its dual strategy of participating in democratic politics while organising terror gangs. The BNP has attempted to develop an electoral machine. The new strategy of Eurofascism is based on tactics which it learnt from the Front National. The Euro-Nazi strategy, put simply, is that previously, open organisations like the British Union of Fascists under Mosley and the National Front, although they had fascist policies, they set up in open attempts to smash people on the street. The BNP developed a strategy of hiding who it was, right? They want to make themselves more attractive. They learned from Le Pen, you might be a Nazi, but you need to hide it. I remember Nick Griffin said, we have to hide the three H's, the hobbies, the Hitlers, we have to hide this. But hiding doesn't mean you hide who you really are, right? That's part of the problems why they, and we need to concentrate on identity and culture. I mean, I couldn't believe it when this Nazi was going, I'd like to talk about identity and culture. And you kept saying, but you're a Nazi, do you know what I mean? You're against all that. But they used it as a strategy and it began to work. It certainly worked with Rod Liddell. I mean, Rod Liddell put him on the radio, he goes, he's no longer talking as a fascist. And suddenly you saw them get onto the airwaves. But the other reason why I did it is, did anybody read Nick Griffin's reasons why you shouldn't go to Woolwich or why you shouldn't have mass demonstrations in the street? He said, in my experience, and my experience comes from Lewisham, that if you go out onto the streets, the left will smash you, right? That's what he's learned. Even Nazis learned that lesson, right? And it's important that that's why they adapted that strategy, because they'd been pushed back on one sense and they want to work at how they could go forward. The EDL is a different type of fascist organisation because it's concentrated much more on building a street movement around football hooligans. And I'll tell you something, I know people, sometimes these people, every weekend, they meet up with different crews and they fight each other on some building site and stuff like that. And then sometimes, because I have to read their stuff, it's like mad stuff. Didn't you get the buzz when somebody's head went down? But I stood. And you say, that's what they do. Do you mean? And then say, I have to buy more expensive Stonehouse things because that got ripped in the battle. And you think that's what they do every weekend. But essentially, what they've been able to do, and they've got Nazis around them, is have virulent Islamophobia, and they've got this buzz from going out and fighting. And I think that what you've seen is that a fascist movement starts to develop and change. In 2009, if people remember Suzanne Moore saying that the EDL was an expression of working class anger. She said that, right? She doesn't say it now, because after hundreds of demonstrations, what happens is the core of what they're about gets exposed. And part of that is the fact they widen their strategy. They attack anti-racist, socialist, they attack Occupy movement, they attacked LGBT demonstrations, May Day demonstrations, they attacked Unite the Building, PCS. In other words, they widened out their targets and start to show who they are. The EDL is organised in like an army structure, divisions, combat groups, commanders. It has regular meetings, a uniform. You see what it's trying to turn those people as individuals into an organised force. Very much like the brown shirts did in Germany and the squadistas did in 1919 to 1922. I don't know if people have pronounced it, 1900, there's a film by Bertolucci, do you know what I'm talking about, yeah? When you see that film and you see them going around the different villages, if you haven't seen that film, please go and see it, right? It's a fantastic film, it shows what was going on in Italy at that time. But I read another book by a man called Paul Corner, who wrote a book on fascism in Ferrara, and he talks about the two phases of how fascists start to develop. Both start by attacking, bands of fascists attack working class centres, but they're pushed back and smashed, when they do it. So then they go out to the weaker areas to reorganise, to give themselves a sense of what they are. In other words, they don't just kind of grow. They have to have some kind of structure. And what he says in his book is that as they grow spontaneously, but they're very unstable organisations. If you look at the EDL, suddenly Tommy Robinson falls out with Snowy. Do you mean the llama killer, right? He was the guy from the Infidels. I knew I'm getting a bit like Dungeons and Dragons on this sometimes, I think. But nevertheless, right, one group falls out with another, and it gets. But the question is, they always need forward activity. When you read their stuff, it's like, when's the next demo? How do we get it bigger? And as they don't get their demos, as they're stopped, actually, their organisations are very fragile and can fall back very, very, very quickly. The question is, imagine they hadn't fallen back and had stayed in relative tact. We hadn't had the 100 demonstrations against them. And when Lee Rigby was killed, instead of having an organisation of a few thousand, supposedly, they'd had 10,000 people intact. Imagine that had been the case. Because I believe we'd be having a different discussion in this meeting now if that had been the case and we hadn't stopped them. And really, the EDL didn't start off as a fascist movement, but really as it's developed and as it's turned and begins to attack the workers' movement, they attacked a picket line, didn't they, in Liverpool? It tells you something about the trajectory in which they're going. So they start to develop in that. I want to talk about, how we stop the EDL and the BNP. It's clear that the EDL and the BNP are trying to capitalise on what happened over Woolwich. And I want to say that the objective conditions for fascism in this country, when people look around and often I'm told, well, fascism can't develop in this country. Goodhart says it, doesn't he? Because we're against extremism. The word Mosley, the BNP, Griffin, all that. He says, because we drink tea and play cricket, right, we're immune to such extreme ideas because it's uncomfortable to the British etiquette and psyche, right? Now, the truth about this is, I think Britain, if you look at what's happened over the objective reasons why we haven't got there should be a big fascist movement in this country. If the Anti-Nazi League hadn't smashed the National Front, they'd have started off from a bigger base. If we hadn't really broken their back in terms of what they did, I think that would be different. I want to talk about Trotsky's theory of the United Front, because I think it's very important that we understand it, because there's a lot of new people that come into the movement when they see the EDL, they want to say, how do we stop them? I think, I was educated, I'm very glad to say I was educated in the Socialist Workers' Party about developing a method that was effective in terms of being able to stop them. We have a duty, I think, not only to stop the fascists, but also to develop a history and a tradition about how you do that. And really what we're talking about is, if you look at what, we learned a great deal from the Anti-Nazi League, but the key the key question is turning our organisation like UAF into a broad united front. Take somebody like Peter Hain. To be honest, I don't agree with Peter Hain over the Afghan war. The start of the war of Iraq and stuff. I don't agree with him on that. I think he's wrong, right? But does that mean that we don't work together in terms of opposing fascism? Absolutely, we have to work with people like Peter Hain and with the Labour Party. The Labour Party is not as strong as it was 40 years ago. That's, sometimes you go to CLP meetings to speak, and there's 3 of us in the room, right? But nevertheless, it has a much bigger impact. It still has massive influence in working class organisations. And sometimes people say, when you look at the BNP in the last period, they've got the number of MEPs, number of councillors, but they weren't marching on the street. They were leafleting and standing as electoral people, and they weren't organising large demonstrations. They were winning votes and winning elections. And that became very, very difficult in terms of, you had to develop a strategy which was based on going to places like Barking and Dagenham, talking to all the groups, convincing parents to hand out leaflets outside the schools, doing LMHR carnivals like we did inside London, Stoke and Barnsley, and actually putting out a propaganda message about don't vote Nazi in order to be able to win it. And going through that, that's what made Nick Griffin cry on TV when he was rejected by people in Barking and Dagenham. That required painstaking mass movement in order to do that. And I think we've been successful in the sense that before people said that Nick Griffin and those people were going to be honest, there's a handful of councillors now. I remember in Burnley, they lost their last councillor. I mean, these were places in which everywhere you went, there was a BNP spokesman and everything. That is very important that that's happened. There was that guy, I've forgotten his name, on the GLA in a white suit, that was used to Barnbrook, yeah? No, do you mean? Now, I don't know, he's disappeared off the, he's disappeared into, I want to say one thing we do have to do. We have to get rid of Nick Griffin and Andrew Bronze as being an MEP. We have to support the don't, to get rid of them. But we couldn't use the same tactics against the BNP as against the... When you look at the EDL, you can't adapt the same tactics because the EDL is not trying to win votes. What it's trying to do is trying to create a street army determined to crush opposition. I want to talk about two dangers. The first danger is put forward by people like Hope Not Hate and John Crudders, right? That the white working class is upset, so therefore we have to, we have to give some kind of concessions to them, as if the whole working class isn't upset. We like this austerity because we're Muslim and it makes it a bit easier. You know what I mean? We like this. Just the whole of people are attacked by this. And what they put there, they said, if they come out on the streets, just ignore them, right? Just let them walk down the streets. It's fine. If you ignore them, they'll disappear, right? Now, the truth of it is, that strategy, doesn't work. The other thing they do is they say, we're against fascism, but we're also against extreme, what did they say? Political Muslim, Islam, wherever it is. You've got to say you're against both, right? I know. The EDL get 3,000 people on the street. Ajam Chowdhury gets 20 supporters. It's the same, right? The BNP get 800,000 votes. Ajam Chowdhury gets no votes. They're both the same danger. Actually, what you do by doing that is that you mistake the nature. You try and confuse fascism with the, and what you end up doing is you end up blaming the victims. You end up, when people complain about Islamophobia, you say they're the extremists. That's where you end up. And I think that's a disaster. I remember inside, was it Leicester, they said the best way to ignore the EDL is to go and clean the canals. But it was in the middle of winter. So the thing was frozen over. So they went on the ice and they went through the ice. Do you know what I mean? Had to be rescued by the fire brigade. Meanwhile, the Nazis are not, because they're being ignored. It doesn't work. It's not a right strategy. They said, open up your mosque and let Muslims come in there and show that you're not scary. That's what happened in York. Give them a cup of tea. Welcome your oppressors. Can you imagine that? Hitler comes down to a synagogue. Come in. Find out what's wrong with us. We don't really want to take over the world. You just want to kill us. Well, that's fine. Let them in. Well, let them do that. I'm not for doing that. Right? The only question comes, I have to say, there's another argument that comes, and people say we want to confront them. And what they mean by confronting is, they say, are you going to confront the fascist? And what they say is that we have to have, as almost individual fights with people. I want to say the way to defeat the fascist, right, is by mass mobilisations of working class people. The truth is, in Walthamstow, in 2012, I saw kids chase off the EDL as they wet themselves because they weren't let out there. It was kids that did it off the estate. And they weren't big and strong. There was just lots of them, and there was lots of us standing in the middle of the road saying they won't pass. And actually, they said that was a disaster. The same thing happened in Tower Hamlets. Have a look at the pictures upstairs of what the demonstration looked like. And on the Cenotaph demonstration, we've got Amy there with her leg up or whatever it is. Don't tell me that we do not stand out against the Nazis, right? When you look at, to be honest, I'll tell you now, of the organisations, there's lots of arrests and lots of people that have been arrested that I can see them sitting in this bloody room. Do you know what I mean? The truth is that people have to adopt a method that's effective. I'm not talking about elite at the top of society putting out noble slogans alone. What we have to do, or small groups of, usually they mean hard men, don't they? That's the truth of it. They want hard men. What you need, somebody said to me, are you training people in combat strategies? Stuff like that. I said, no, we're not in the army, right? That's not what we do. What we're trying to do is defeat fascism, both politically and also physically actually stop them. Our strength is in numbers. It's always been in numbers. You know it. When you turn up on a demonstration with 10 people, they say to me, here's a van, Mr. Bennett, we're opening up the van and you're going in it, right? That's what happens, right? When you turn up with several thousand people, like in Walthamstow and Tower Hamlets, wherever it is, they go, hello, Sir Bennett, right? How would you like to run this demonstration? How can we facilitate this demonstration, right? And you know it's not because of you. It's because there's thousands of people standing behind you, right? They're black, they're white, they're women, they're gay, they're straight, they're young, they're old, and together they're powerful. And also something else, there's trade union banners there. And also, in the last demonstration I was on, inside the Cenotaph, they said, should we nick the people? And I could hear over the radio, be careful, there's some councillors there. I think there's even an MP. What do they look like, Sarge? We don't know, right? And what that means is, very simple what it means is, before they grab people and say you're making trouble, they know that argument won't run. Because that's part of the thing, you have to have the strength, both politically to do that, but also to isolate these people. Our strength is in Cable Street, Brick Lane, Tower Hamlets, Walthamstow. But for every one of those demonstrations, I've stood in a rainy car park somewhere, been kettled in or wherever it is. Hundreds of demonstrations, not now, but for the last 10 years. Not then, but for 20 years before that. And you have to have a strategy that does and build that. And finally, I want to say that, when we look across the world at the growth of fascist forces, inside the United Fronts, we have to raise an argument about the failure of social democracy, the failure to deal with the real crisis that's affecting people. Come on, I've seen Holocaust survivor from France comes and speaks against Marie Le Pen, saying that you killed my family, and she's allowed back, that Marie Le Pen is let in to the Cambridge Union. I tell you, we should do everything we can to stop Tommy Robinson speaking at the Oxford Union. We should definitely do that. In Birmingham, I want to demoralise the bombers who planted the bomb outside Tipton. So we have to turn up on that demonstration. But I have to say this. I'm not, I started fighting fascists when I was growing up with the Anti-Nazi League, going to gigs then. And I'm still doing it, and I'm 48. I look at my kids, I look at my kids, whatever it is, and say, is this the future of our society? Is this actually the future of our society? What type of society are we going to live in when you go to a mosque and people say, I'm scared to go out? People say that they're, a Muslim. What I want to see is what happened outside Muswell Hill Mosque, when people turned around and said, you know what, everybody's with us. That's what they said, everybody's with us. We've got confidence. And I want that confidence to go into the working class as well, not just to take on the people that burn it down, the people that are burning down our society, closing our hospitals, closing our schools, the real people that allow the rats to come out by organising the sewer in terms of the society that we live in. We've got a world to win, and one of the things is the last time they killed millions of people. We say never again, but we have to have an alternative, we have to have a future, and we have to talk about how we organise socialists in order to do that.
Hello, comrades. My name's Retta Moore, and I'm in the SWP in Manchester, and I want to talk about our method. We have to apply ruthless self-criticism about action that's actually situated, taking place in real time and real space. And out of that ruthless self-criticism, we work out what we need to do next, what action we're going to take. It comes from our historical materialist tradition. We call it praxis, the marriage between the theory and the practice. Why? Because we have so much to do. When we have to be able to explain why we are doing what we are doing, that is what being classical Marxists is. We never lie to the class, and we never lie to the party. And when you speak the truth, you're clear. So people understand your explanations for your actions, but you speak it in a way that leaves them open to be able to say, I don't quite understand. So they can learn, so they can become the leaders, they can come forward, so that they can relate to the outside. Now, what I'm saying is we debate, we decide, and we do. And in the context of the rise of the far right, we are dealing with a gross increase in scapegoating. And for me, the treatment that has been meted out to people seeking asylum over the last 15 years has been a cornerstone in the development of that within the social policy of this country, where they've separated out a section of our population. So it means that they can do things to Jimmy Mubenga and nobody will know. They can create the fear. It means there's a relationship between what they do there and then when they've scapegoated the asylum seekers, now they're going to scapegoat the welfare benefit people, right? What does that mean on the streets of Manchester? It means that when you mobilise against the bedroom tax, you have to deal with the EDL trying to attack the back of the bedroom tax demonstration, and you have to deal with police who are not prepared to make an intervention there. Because we have lots of things at our disposal in terms of knowledge. We know the cover-ups in Orgreave. We know the cover-ups in Hillsborough. We know we cannot rely on the state. We know the state will play with the fire of the fascists if the state feels the need to do so. One other thing I want to bring up, which I think we're missing so far, not because you've not said it, but because there is so much to do. And that's the growth of anti-Irish racism. That's the condition now where in a West End bar a few weeks ago, some bartender and some company thought it was okay to serve a Bloody Sunday cocktail. Now, I believe there was water cannon on the streets of Ireland last night. This is what we're dealing with. And the way we deal with fear, we don't feed the fear, we don't allow them to turn their worms into the dragons, because we are clear, because we are honest, because we are ruthless, and because we will not be divided.
My name is Lynn Chamberlain, and I'm a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, Woolwich and Plumstead branch. The following Saturday, we're a very small branch, but we swung into action as best we could. We went down to Woolwich with the paper, Socialist Worker to Sell, and petitions and flyers. We quickly realised, however, that the front page of Socialist Worker said, get them all out. So, for the avoidance of any misunderstanding, we turned the paper round, which was about, I forget which strike it was. No, it's about Egypt. But anyway, we sold 62 papers that day, and many, many people in the community signed the petition and took the flyers. And there was an awful lot of understandable anxiety. Spoke, for example, to a white woman. There's many examples like this. A white woman who's married to a black bloke who said he was afraid to go out. Spoke to a young teacher of Asian women, and she said all her group were afraid to go out. We got the UAF statement signed by many people, including the ex-mayor, local Labour Party constituencies, and people in the local mosque really welcomed us when we went there to try to build a UAF meeting. So there was great support for us in the community. But the leadership of the Labour Council went against us. A comrade and myself were leafleting outside the town hall for a forthcoming meeting. And when I got back home, I had a phone call from one of the meeting places to say, I'm sorry, Lynn, and this is where we've been meeting for the Socialist Workers' Party in Woolwich, have been meeting for over 30 years. We're booked up, forgot to tell you that. The next day I had a letter saying, similar, but because what it was, we'd said it was a UAF meeting, didn't think there'd be a problem, and there was. Then another meeting place, all of these are council-owned or council-run or whatever, had a phone call 2 days before the meeting. We'd advertised it as UAF. We weren't trying to, say it was the local knitting group or anything like that. We had nothing to hide. Our policies state this, that, and the other. Sorry. Well, anyway, luckily, a few people from the mosque are totally on our side, not surprisingly, and they're going to help build for a UAF group. We had to be working fast, actually, which is why it was difficult to get somewhere else to meet because of the potential march the following Saturday. But we'll keep trying. Thank you.
Hi comrades, my name's Dean Reiner from Hackney SWP. I want to talk about this argument about how Britain is somehow different and how it's because we all drink tea. Actually, in 1977 in London, the National Front were the third highest party, and their base was in Hoxton in Shoreditch. In 1979, me and my family moved to Hoxton in Shoreditch, and actually, people have probably heard me talk about this again, but I'm never going to be sick of telling people about this, because actually it was a scary place. It was a scary place. On Hoxton Street, the National Front used to sell their paper, bulldog. I remember walking down Hoxton Market on a Saturday and being spat at, and old age pensioners having the confidence to come at you and say to you, "You're a nigger, get home." I remember a slogan on the wall saying, "But wogs out, package go home." I remember people actively talking about how they would be going packet bashing, and that was the atmosphere, and that is the atmosphere which grows when you let fascists openly organise on the streets. And actually, it's a real vindication of the United Front strategy that actually I wasn't involved when I was just a young kid, but I remember seeing guys with beards and coming out with lollipops, and the whole atmosphere on the streets being transformed. And when you go to Hoxton Market now, 30 years on, it's a totally different place. I'm not saying there isn't racist ideas in the community, because of course they're prevailing ideas of society, but actually it's a very mixed community. It's a community which has got black barbers and black stuff, and that's the importance of the work. What I do want to talk about, I've got a friend called Steve Cedar who lives in Spain, and Steve lives in a place called Vic, which is 60 miles outside of Barcelona. And Steve said to me, "Oh my God," a couple of years ago we went there, he said, "Oh my God, we've got fascists standing for election in our town." And he said he wanted to set up an anti-fascist group. And he said, "Oh, there's all sorts of arguments going around about let's set up our marches differently, let's not confront them, let's not do this." And actually, the way he won the argument was he showed them a video of Waltham Forest when we stopped the Nazis, and actually he said that the Spanish comrades around, the Spanish people in the town, when they saw that video, their eyes lit up and they said, "Oh my God, this is fantastic, this is exactly what we must do." And it shows you that actually by fighting in this country and showing a model on which we can fight, actually our comrades across the world can see that as a model that works, that unites people, that confronts the Nazis, that exposes them at Nazis, and actually we've got to keep doing that. And the last thing I will say is that I work for the public sector, and public sector workers have been hammered recently, and you would think that actually public sector workers would be the most resistant to racist ideas. But actually I've had to have some hard arguments, not just actually with predominantly black comrades, my black colleagues, and it shows you that actually we need to make sure that we win the political arguments. We talk about confronting the Nazis on the street, but in every workplace, every lunchtime, every opportunity you get, you need to be pushing socialist ideas, because if you're not, actually people's ideas can get all over the place. And actually I've got a friend called Mo who loves me talking about the Anti-Nazi League, but he's never actually come. He's never actually come on a demo. But the one thing he did come on was the number of the 30th strike when we were striking together. So what I'm saying is actually let's push anti-racist ideas, but let's push the politics as well.
I was going to stand on my crutches to speak, but I realised I waved my hands around too much and I'd probably fall over. I thought, some of you may know what happened to me. I was on the demonstration on the 1st of June against the BNP who were marching to the cenotaph, and a policeman decided to use my leg for football practice, hence the brace and everything. And I just wanted to speak briefly, firstly to thank people for the support and solidarity I have, and I really would like to thank you. It does mean a lot when you're sort of stuck in hospital facing numerous operations. But I wanted to speak about a few things. One of the things I wanted to say is, people asked me afterwards, did I regret going on the demonstration? And I think it's really important to say that I absolutely at no point regretted going on the demonstration, nor indeed what happened. Well, obviously I'd rather the policeman hadn't decided to do what he did, but what was really, obviously I don't regret it. I think fighting fascism is something to be very proud to stand up for, and it's something that's certainly worth getting your leg broken over. People have certainly had lots worse than that. But what was really noticeable for me, and what really kept my spirits up, is being taken to an NHS hospital immediately after it happens, and suddenly you're meeting doctors and from Philippines, you're meeting nurses from Nepal, you're meeting cleaners from Poland, you're meeting a myriad of people who you treated really well when they found out you're an anti-fascist and what's happened to you. And suddenly you think, look at our side. Our side is the many. Our side is colourful, it's vibrant, it's caring. I was thinking there was a fascist who was beaten up, I believe, I can't think why, on that same day, and he was taken to a different hospital. And I kept thinking, I wonder how he's finding it. I wonder how he's finding being treated by all these immigrants. So I was, I think, if you're going to break your leg, it's not a bad way to go. So on that note, I would like to say, no regrets, absolutely. Thanks. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is that people throw the word hero around, and people did call me a hero, and I would like to say I have not behaved particularly heroic throughout the whole process. There's been a fair amount of crying and screaming as it's gone on. But it really made me squirm at the first, and I think it's a word that's bandied around far too much by the right. A hero, I think, is a term that we need to think about. But then I suddenly realised that it wasn't heroic having your leg broken by a policeman. No, that's sort of unfortunate. But actually, we're all heroes who stand on the street and stand up against the fascists. And actually, suddenly I thought, you know what, I am a hero, but I've been a hero for the last 15 years when I've got out on the street. And all of you lot are heroes who stand up against fascists, because it's a proud tradition that we're in, and something not to be ashamed of. And actually, let's claim that word hero back for the people who are really fighting to make this country a better place to live. The last thing I want to say, and I really know I'm going over, and I really want to say this, and I know this isn't going to be so popular, but it was with real deep regret that I left the SWP early this year, as lots of other people I know had to. And in a few of the meetings that I've been to since that happened, and actually just prior to it, people talked about it was important not to fall out, to have disputes, to look inward when the right are on the move like this. And I hope that I'm proof that we can still work together. I would never stop fighting fascism just because I may have disagreements with some of the things that have been happening in the party. And on that note, I would really ask people to openly engage in debate, fraternally, openly, because I think there are changes that need to be made, and we do need to look at those things. And I do really hope that we can all fight fascism together. Thank you.
I think that there is an urgency to fight against fascism all around Europe, and this is not connected that you have the fascists just in front of your eyes. The general situation is pushing them in the forefront. They try to exploit crisis. The racist policies of the government pave their way there, and there are no solutions from above. I mean, you can listen right-wing politicians arguing that the fascists are growing because there is tolerance to immigrants, because the left is anti-racist. These are arguments that we are listening in Greece. So we have to be very clear that when we speak about fascism, we don't speak about the state and their suppressive politics. We are speaking about a movement in the street that is offering themselves as a force to smash the workers' movement. Because in the period of crisis, you have the struggles fighting, and the ruling class, the only way to disorientate struggle is to play this card of racism. The fascists are there to say that what the state cannot do, we can do it. So you have to smash them. You have to kick them outside the streets, outside the universities, outside the parliament, the local councils, and so on. We have to be very clear, because the other argument is coming from above, telling that the institutions of the system of bourgeois democracy, they can stop them. This is a big lie. Hitler got the order to form his government by the president of the German Republic. We don't forget that. So we have to fight from below as a worker movement. And when we say that we are fighting on the street, and I am ending by that, and we are confronting the fascists, the way to do it is to be based on the workers' movement. This is the biggest force to kick them outside the streets. So whenever we are demonstrating in Greece and we are fighting to have free our areas, we have a lot of banners there. We have the teachers' banners everywhere, the local authorities, the hospital workers. These are three unions which we were connected, and this is the power to kick them outside the neighborhoods. So the issue of physical violence in the demonstration is important, but you have to avoid some dangers. They're not the fascists that are always in front of you. It's the police, it's the government, it's the state. So sometimes we will not attack them. We have to be careful that when you defend the neighborhood, you have to build a majority in the neighborhood, and you build a majority when you are fighting against austerity, when you are fighting against racism.
Can you sum up, please, comrade?
And of course, you're always including the migrants. The migrants are not some people with whom you show solidarity, but they are the people who are there in your demonstrations.
When we found out that the EDL were coming to Newcastle early in the year, I was really looking forward to it, because I was looking forward to giving them the type of reception that they've been deserving. And because they were a movement on the down, you know, we expected that we would well outnumber them and that we would be able to deal with them as they should be dealt with. Then, of course, Woolwich happened a few days before the Newcastle demonstration. Now, a few things. First of all, we've got to be clear. On the day, there were probably more of them than there was of us. But there were more people from Newcastle on our demonstration than there was people in Newcastle on their demonstration. They were bussed in. So that's important, because the importance of that is about the question of how we operate and build roots in our local communities. Because you can be an army that moves from town to town to town, but it's what you leave behind. And so therefore it was very important that in Newcastle we expanded UAF. I've heard a lot of people talk about we need to have new thinking, right? I mean, I've fucking heard new thinking ever since I joined the party in 1978. The reality is we had some new thinking. What we did was we had UAF at the core, But we built a group called Newcastle Unites Against the EDL, which was able to overcome some of the obstacles that we'd been placed in our path by the local TUC bureaucracy and so on, and we were able to draw into that group Labour councillors, the TUC, Hope Not Hate, Show Racism the Red Card. So we were able on the day to put out a very representative demonstration, and one I was extremely proud of, because it's that type of work that needs to be done. It's the nitty-gritty day-to-day work, the building of the roots that's important. And I'll tell you who does that. Revolutionary socialist with a perspective. That's the people who do it. And I just want to say one last thing, incidentally. I joined the SWP in 1978. I joined it because I'd seen what had happened the year before in Lewisham, where the Socialist Workers' Party were demonised as a party which took bottles of ammonia and poison at the National Front. You know what I thought? I thought, good. I'm glad they did that, because it's about time somebody stood up against them. So I'm proud of my organisation. My life has been made better by the fact that the SWP existed and fought against the Nazis, and your life will be made better if you join it as well.
My name's Jackie. I'm from Weyman. I'm a very, very proud member of being Leicester SWP and also Leicester Unite Against Fascism. Basically, we've had the EDL come to Leicester 3 times now. The first time, we hadn't been able to get a UAF meeting really successfully off the ground. And when we went in there, I've never seen the council stand so united against stopping us doing something. The mayor went crazy. He had council workers working overtime, giving leaflets out saying the Leicester City Council is a no-go zone because the EDL are going to be there. The unions wouldn't back us. My own union from the public sector union, that we now know is under a massive attack all over the country, wouldn't back us. Actually, PCS, so big up PCS, actually, they were the only union that came out. Now, that first time, we stood up, a few of us, and said, we're going to leaflet, and we leafleted like mad, we leafleted to the Moss, and we got about 600 people there, which was absolutely unexpected and fantastic. The second time, the unions did turn up. Do you know what I mean? So things were changing. We got a couple of Labour councillors who were prepared to kind of break with the Labour establishment and stand at the clock tower and, you know, like kind of stand in front of those fascists to stop them coming down. Incidentally, the role of the police, absolutely disgusting, disgusting. On the second demonstration, the EDL were offered 13 routes. 13 routes. They went right through the heart of our city centre. Unite Against Fascism, which was built locally, in comparison to the EDL demonstration that was built nationally, were offered 1. And it was on a muddy field, ironically called Nelson Mandela Park. We didn't accept that. We went for the city centre. We didn't get quite what we wanted, but we were getting there. The third time, when the EDL came to Leicester, a little bit of a strange, different tack for the EDL this time. No flags, no manners, none of that stupid EDL nonsense. They decided not to bring banners because it's about Lee Rigby. Now they're hiding a little bit clever in Leicester, but that's another story. I'll tell you why. Basically, this time we had a demonstration. Can you stand up now, please? Yeah, really. This time we had a demonstration. The unions were there, the Labour group were there, with councillors, with the banner. And guess who turned up at the back? The Mayor of Leicester. So if you keep on plugging it away, you will get there. We haven't stopped the EDL yet, but we will do, and we're going to keep going. I'm sorry.
2 things then in those 2 minutes. The first thing is that what people have said about building locally rooted Unite Against Fascism groups is incredibly important, because we have seen the EDL surge back after Woolwich, and that is a very great danger, and we must not take our eye off that. But I want to remind people of something else as well, and that something is UKIP. Right? UKIP are not a fascist organisation. They're not trying to smash up democracy. They're not trying to smash up the working class. But they are a vicious, very far right, like the extreme right of the Tories, and they are using the race card. They are using racist populism to build their vote. And what that does is it creates a breeding ground for the EDL. It legitimises all those ideas. It pumps out filth. Millions and millions in the election. Millions and millions of election leaflets are going to come out from UKIP for the Euro elections and the local elections next year, blaming immigrants for austerity and for the crisis and for unemployment, attacking Bulgarians and Romanians, attacking our multicultural society, attacking Muslims. That is ground that is fertile for the EDL and the BNP, and it means that we have to do something else. On the one hand, yes, we have to build our UAF groups and fight against the fascists, but we also have to do something about UKIP. Now, there's going to be a new campaign starting, Stand Up to UKIP. That will be something to try and expose what UKIP are all about, so that we don't all start thinking Nigel Farage is this good old boy, you know, down the pub with his pint. That it actually looks at what their policies really are all about, exposes them with leaflets, badges. These are things that we need to spread around. You need to talk to your workmates about them, because UKIP in the last elections came in as the third party. All we can see is the Lib Dems collapsing more, and we can see UKIP rising. And what they do, they drag the whole of mainstream politics to the right, because the Tories cave into them, Labour caves into them, and the whole thing creates a horrible, noxious puddle of racism, and the fascists like that because they like to feed in it. So we have to do those two things, right? Build UAF and get involved in Stand Up to UKIP. I think there's order forms where you can get badges and leaflets going to be given out at the back. And one last thing that I think is a special duty of socialists.
Now, please, comrade.
Yeah, I will sum up on this. One last thing that I think is a special duty of socialists and revolutionaries in particular is, as well as those things, which are very, very broad-based campaigns where you involve a lot of people with different politics, we also have to be the ones that say immigrants are welcome here. Immigrants are welcome here. We defend their rights. We stand up for them every day.
Let's talk a little bit about the firebombing of the community centre in Muswell Hill in North London. Don't know if people know North London, but we refer to it as Muesli Hill in Tottenham. It's a very well-to-do place, bordered on Barnet. So I know it's quite shocking news, especially given that, as Weyman was pointing out, when the middle class get angry, they can actually turn to fascism. But it isn't automatic, and actually the fact that we were able to build very, very quickly, following day, a vigil of 500 people, many of them working class, middle class, local people, actually showed that actually it was very possible to actually respond to the EDL quite in a way which actually strengthened our side. I'm not saying I'm welcoming firebombings of mosques, but I'm saying that in our response to it, actually we began to lay the grounds for a bigger and stronger unite against fascism across North London. And I think that's important because the kind of people that got involved, we didn't invite a Tory councillor, but unfortunately a Tory councillor turned up, so we let her speak, along with all the other speakers, including SWP speakers. And Tash is absolutely correct. We've got to make sure that when we're doing the broad movement, where there's always someone there actually saying it's the bankers to blame, not the immigrants. We can't actually leave that to anyone else because no one else is going to say that. And then we're able to go on to build a public meeting in Muswell Hill of about 200 people, again with speakers from the Labour Party, from Liberal Democrats, in fact a Liberal Democrat minister as it happens. I felt me a little bit sick every time she said, so thank you very much, Gary, for inviting me to the Unite Against Fascism meeting. Thank you. She get down and thank you. She felt very guilty about the racism that she's spreading all over the country in her coalition government. But nevertheless, she doesn't like racism as a person and came along to the meeting. And that makes it easier for us to actually build and to get to wider forces, and makes it harder for the people who want to attack Unite Against Fascism to claim that somehow we're just lots of boot boys just interested in violence on the streets. And just lastly, I think that fascism is such an important thing in terms of fighting it. Actually, discipline is important. Therefore, it's not very useful when people who claim to be members of the Socialist Workers' Party set up blogs attacking the leadership of the UAF for being disorganised and for not knowing what they're doing, for having the wrong strategy and so on, when these very same people failed to turn up for the Muswell Hill protest.
Hi, I'm Bennett. I'm a student from Burnley. I just want to tell you about a protest that me and some friends did against the EDL in Burnley the other week. Basically, we're all quite excited about it because we hate the EDL, and we wanted to get as many students involved in it. And we put loads of flyers around the colleges, and basically the police turned around and said we can't have it in the centre. We have to have it in a car park. Out of town, and so no one will be able to see us, so we're really angry about that. But we did it anyway, and it was a really wet day. But I just want to say I've been fighting against fascism and racism since I was the age of 10. All my family have been fighting against it, and this is my 10th Marxism. So, and it's the first time I've spoke. I just want to say I'm not going to stop fighting. And one of my mates who sat over there, he actually got beaten up by the BNP, well, not the BNP, the EDL, on the way home from the protest. And it just makes me feel sick, basically. And I'm not going to stop fighting. And the fact that I'm mixed race as well, I feel really strongly about it. And I've got members in my family who are Muslim, and it really angers me. And I just want to get as many students to, get involved in it, come on the marches in London, Manchester, wherever, and just, keep fighting. Thank you.
A few weeks ago, the Sheffield Trades Council passed a motion which congratulated UAF for the protest that it delivered against the EDL in Sheffield, and also condemned the police for their behaviour. And it also made a link. Because we were so successful in the first demonstration, and we stood up to the EDL and we stopped them, the state responded by spending £500,000 locking down the city for the next week. Despite that, 2,000 people turned out. Well, actually, you can ask a question, can't you? What you could do with £500,000 in terms of dealing with the despair that we have to face in society today. So we condemn them for spending that money. But we also learnt lots of lessons in Sheffield as well, because we've been meeting, as a couple of us actually have met over the last 5 years. Every month we've sat down with a Labour councillor, with some students that aren't in the SWP, with people from different faith communities, and we've sat down them consistently for 5 years, and sometimes for 5 minutes, and sometimes for an hour and a half. And we've gone through over the last 5 years a discussion with them of the ups and downs of the fascist movement. And when we got to our meeting, when we heard the EDL were coming, really we had a discussion that said, this is why we've met. We went through some arguments about what happened in the 30s, about different arguments about whether you confront fascists, whether you let them march, whether you turn your back on them. The protest itself on the day really played out in lots of different ways. Was a running argument with the steering committee, and our comrades wandering around the crowd saying, you do not move, you stand firm and you stand united. And we learned lots of lessons from that. We did it from being in a minority, but actually we needed to be in a minority sometimes because we have to convince other people to come with us. And the way that the protest finished, when we stopped the EDL and we stopped the police horses, and they really did have a little dig at us, the way we finished it really was just to say, whether you're 5 foot or 6 foot, whether you're of faith or of no faith, whether you're political or you're not, whether you're there to fight or there to stand as a pacifist, when you actually stand together and you stand in force of numbers, we win, they don't, we get stronger, they lose. Back in the gutter for them.
Hiya comrades, my name's Bill Ashcroft. I'm a disability person who has a problem talking to people. Can you speak into the microphone? Right, there you go. Disability people, it happens to all the time. All right, cheers, mate. My name's Bill Ashcroft. I live in Manchester. I have a memory problem with my brain. I was really ill, and I was really happy that it did not die, basically, because I had a cardiac arrest and I lost a lot of brain problems. The seeds inside of our brains say, that's a fascist, that's a scumbag, things like that. But the great thing that I've got memory of was when I got back, when I woke up, was my grandchild, Caleb. He's 6. That's 6 years ago. And there was also another woman called Julie Watson who said, yeah, how do you be? Is Bill all right? And my other comrades who came and said, are you all right, Bill? And I couldn't talk properly then. It took me nearly 3 years before I could even talk to people and put back some of the stuff, the letters that comrades gave me. But straight away, I understood I was a Trotskyist, I was a fighter against the fascists who in Europe at the moment are getting a lot bigger than we thought were, because I don't want to have a fight in Britain with the SWP and comrades that don't want to fight back with me.
Hi, yeah, Josh, I'm going to Hull University, but I'm helping out at the Love Music, Hate Racism office. And I think a lot of people have spoken today about the need for mass mobilisations for broad movements. And I think it's important that we look back at our history and what we've achieved in the Anti-Nazi League, you know, as the SWP, and then also within UAF. And there was a great quote, and I always remember this. I wasn't live at the time, but I remember hearing about it. John Tyndall, who was the leader of the National Front, saying, you know, when it all came apart at the NF, said it really came apart because it became impossible to organise, because everywhere they went there was a protest by the ANL. Everywhere they went there were diverse groups of people and socialists and other activists there to mobilise against them and to shout them down. And I think we have to be clear that we are the people that are doing that around the country, and we have to keep that up. The second thing, and I said about remembering our history, there is a Love Music Hate Racism exhibition on at Marxism this weekend of all our posters through the years. I really recommend people go and see that, because I think it's really inspiring to look at the pictures of kids dancing in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and getting involved in anti-fascism. And secondly, you know, Tash talked about our UKIP campaign. I really do recommend that, and joining Unite Against Fascism. But also we're doing a trip to Krakow and Auschwitz, because our history is really important. And one of the slogans that we have, that we raise at every single demonstration, is never again. Is Auschwitz never again? And the Nazi concentration camps never again. And we had to take those lessons back, and we need to put them back into the movement. Because I tell you, I was scared. And I was in America last year, I was out of the country. I was scared when I saw the reports of mosques being burnt down. And I was scared that we were seeing a repeat of Kristallnacht, and we have to take back what the people did, you know, the resistance in the concentration camps, the resistance in the ghettos, and we need to take that back into our movements and say we are united and never again.
I want to say respect to the chair, because it's obviously been a very difficult meeting to chair without speaker's slips. What I more importantly wanted to say as well, it's been 4 years, the EDL, and it doesn't seem like it for people who have been working hard against it, as people in this room have been and other people have been, but it has been 4 bloody years. It seems incredible, really, all the ups and downs and everything. End of last year, Robinson was on his uppers. He was locked away in a prison not far away from here. The EDL was in decline. They had a demonstration, national demo to free our Tommy, political prisoner. 67 people turned up, right? 67 people turned up. That's imitation Tom Robinson, by the way, it's nothing else. 67 people turned out. It pulled it down all day. It was a bloody washout for them. Full stop. Of course, Woolwich happened, and as the socialist worker and other people have said, the EDL, I'm glad we've had this analysis. For all the faults, all the mistakes, we get things wrong sometimes, obviously. We've been saying it, but we get things, been saying the EDL and BNP are down, but not out. Woolwich, unfortunately, to say the very least, prove that. One thing about the post-Woolwich situation, it shows you again, as classic fascists, even Hitler after he came to power, never cracked the workplaces, he never broke through the industrial working class, whatever else he did. The EDL have got the same weaknesses in terms of the workplaces. The collective, subjective responses that Weyman and people have talked about from around the country, the Brighton smashing of the EDL friends at the March for England earlier this year as well, all of that, the collective response, I was down at Union Conference, PCS Conference, the collective response, people were shocked by Woolwich, of course, overnight, and then what do we do? What is to be done? And I think people passed the test magnificently over Woolwich in all sorts of ways. 2 more quick things. We face tests every week at UAF and the SWP. Sometimes we don't always do with flying colours. I think a lot of the time we do. Birmingham on Saturday is demonstration. It's national for the EDL. It's regional for us. I think we'll pass the test. Croydon in a week's time. I think we can pass the test. But it's that collective class response, but in a broad-based sense. And let me say last thing as well, when we confront these swines, these scum, we do it on a class-based, broad-based, mass response.
I'm afraid this next speaker will be our last contribution, as we're out of time.
Comrades, I remember exactly what I was doing on the 22nd of May. I'd spent the day on a fantastically inspiring demonstration against the legal aid cuts, and we had a fantastic rally afterwards. And when we came out to have a pint to celebrate, we heard the horrific news about the murder of Lee Rigby. And I remember feeling, first of all, absolute disgust at the fact that he had been murdered, and then secondly, a sense of fear that this was going to give the fascists a fillip. And we saw precisely that, didn't we? That very evening, when Robinson and his thugs turned up in Woolwich seeking to foment violence against Muslim communities. We saw it, didn't we, in the attacks upon mosques and Islamic centres. We saw it in the individual examples of Muslim women having their veils ripped off and being punched in the face. That's why I am proud that immediately overnight we produced a statement in the UAF office saying, don't let the racists divide us. And Amy talked about people being heroes who were going on the demonstrations. The demonstration, those who stood up against the fascists in Newcastle that Saturday, those of us who were on the demonstration in London that bank holiday Monday, those people were heroes, because it was horrible and frightening to be massively outnumbered by the fascists. But we turned it around, didn't we, by making making sure, as Weyman said, that the weekend afterwards, when the BNP and the EDL tried to march, we massively outnumbered them. But that it's not enough, we cannot afford to be complacent. That has been the message.
Can you sum up now, please, Comrade?
I have been enormously proud as Assistant Secretary of UAF. It's hard work, but going to meetings up and down the country, going to the meeting in Leicester, in Birmingham and Ipswich and Harlow and Brixton and Islington and places like that, and seeing meetings that have been organised by comrades who have gone into their workplaces and made sure that those meetings have looked like the local community, have been Muslim, have been Jewish,
Sorry, Comrade,
have been Christian,
have to stop now.
have been trade unionists and so on. It's important. I'm sure Weyman will make the point. We need to go back to all of our workplaces, our colleges, our schools, our trade union branches, and make sure that we build for the future, passing the resolutions, building the UAF groups to ensure that if the EDL march and when we build the campaign against Bronze and Griffin, that we have the resources there to make sure that we achieve what we want to achieve.
I'll try and sum up quickly. The first thing I want to say is that the truth is, I'm really glad what people said, but also that they talked about the problems that we face and overcome. You see, the truth is that every single time we're told to wait for a ban, that a ban is the answer, actually what it does, it demobilises the movement. And we have to understand there's been three types of demonstrations. There's been lots of demonstrations, and most of the time we're told, wait for a ban, the police will deal with it. And we've had to say that isn't a solution. We've also had to say to people that want a ban, we understand why you want one, but that isn't a solution, and we've had to win people to that position. We're going to face this time and time again, and we have to talk about the question of overcoming it. Petros made a very important point about Europe, the crisis in Europe. Kiev has been building for 8 years, am I right? 8 years. In other words, we've been paying a long time for what's happening. When they call 34 demonstrations, it's because people had built local groups. It's absolutely vital that we don't wait for a situation like Lee Rigby or anything like that, that we actually build groups now. Because the truth is that when it came to your town, people rang me up and said, there's a demo in my street, my town, Weyman, are you coming down? But I'd had 44 calls like that, do you know what I mean? And the truth is, no one was coming down, it's down to you. And I tell you something, people responded magnificently. It's also true that we have to fight as well in different ways in terms of isolating the fascists. In Birmingham, they've done a fantastic job of building a demonstration, but also they've got the Manic Street Preachers to put out a statement saying how dare the EDL use their song, their anti-fascist song. That has gone to thousands of people. Some of them will never go on the demo, but what they know is fascist, EDL, wrong, right? They know that. And that's part of the thing about winning the propaganda, winning the propaganda argument. The question of the state. Because some people say it's just us, the fascists won on line side, and there's nobody in between. The truth of it is when you turn up, there's more police there. I want to talk about one other problem, because people said to me, why is it when we turned up 3 days after Lee Rigby was killed, there wasn't like thousands of people out there? Why were we outnumbered? And I said to them, I remember once, somebody explaining to me once, when the Birmingham pub bombs went off, right, that everybody who was Irish pretended that they weren't, right, because there was a backlash, right? The truth of it is how long, when they have a backlash, we have a backlash against a backlash, right? That's what we did. We turned that and pushed that back. The truth is they weren't able to sustain that, because for once they come out of it. Now, and then somebody said to me, why didn't you turn Woolwich into Lewisham? And I said, what's wrong with you, right? There's a black guy standing with a knife over a soldier, right? The Nazis were talking about attacking Lewisham and there's a different tactics according to the different situation. You have to look at what they're doing. It was very good to write to the families and to the people, even the Reds say, those people to turn around and say, will you sign the petition saying, don't let the racists divide us? In other words, we built up the background in terms of being able to do that. In terms of UKIP, we've got a big storm coming across Europe. The answer to the crisis at the moment, we're told, is sometimes racism and division. It's important that we have stand up to UKIP, and we've been able to say, I'm really worried actually, one thing, please nobody here hit Nigel Farage. I know he deserves it, yeah, but he's not a Nazi, right? And it's very important that we understand we should demonstrate and organise against him, But where we should make sure that he doesn't develop is to make sure we put millions of leaflets out saying he's a liar. He said the majority of Bulgarians were going to move from Bulgaria to this country. We have to say that he's a liar. But even if they did, socialists say they're welcome here. When my parents came here as a nurse, they said they're welcome here. Socialists take a position of taking a hard position of saying that immigrants aren't to blame. Well, maybe the guy that owns the Sun. Do you mean he is to blame? He's a billionaire. These people are to blame. I want to end up by there's so many people across the place have made stands that's changed the lives of people. I don't believe that Britain. There's no objective reason why there shouldn't be a massive fascist party in this country. None whatsoever. I don't accept the chauvinist argument that it's Jeremy Paxman and his fishing rod that's made the difference in terms of just saying we quietly fish when we're angry with a very wiry grin. And that's what happened when he did with Tommy Robinson. He kind of raised his eyebrow. I'm against you, right? That's not the reason why the Nazis have been stopped. They've been stopped because every time they've come out, we've opposed them. And not only that, we've won. The truth of it, people should not forget the disaster that took place in Germany. I tell you, one of the disasters was they wouldn't unite with the Social Democrats, but they wouldn't even unite with themselves. They wouldn't unite with the Social Democrats and they wouldn't unite with themselves. And that led to a disaster. We have got heroes. They're called Leon Trotsky. The Stranglers were wrong about that. Right? No, it's not them who sang that song, No More Heroes anymore, is it? It is? Sorry, good. We have got heroes, right? We have got heroes. They come out every day and fight against the fascists. They fight against racism, sexism, homophobia, and what they actually push. These are our heroes. They're not the heroes at the top of society. They're our heroes. But I tell you something else. We have to fight for. We have to fight for much more. We also have to fight for how we use our socialist politics to make sure that we change our society. Because I tell you something, everywhere I go around the world, where there's a strong socialist, revolutionary socialist party built in the IS tradition, when I go to Barcelona, when I go to Greece, when I go anywhere else, people say around the world in the anti-fascist movement, the key places where the Nazis have been pushed back is being pushed back by this method. And it's a method which we need to make sure is pushed everywhere. For the Roma inside Hungary, for the Roma inside France, we have to make sure we make a stand for these people. These people oppose it. Now, I'll end up with one of our heroes is Julie Waterson, right? One of our heroes is Julie Waterson. That's the truth of it. That we stand in a long line of heroes in terms of trying to change our society. But I think that the most important thing to do is to make sure that we send the Nazis into the dustbin of history. That's what happened in the Russian Revolution when Trotsky, a Jew, could be elected to the leader of the Petrograd Association, that where workers could make democratic decisions about what their alternative was and shape their society in terms of blaming people. The real question is, when we face austerity, what is our alternative? What's the alternative to this society? And the start of making that alternative is to join the Socialist Workers' Party. I've never regretted joining the Socialist Workers' Party, well, obviously, right? But I tell you one thing it has done. My whole family, as we've grown up, I tell you the thread that's run through our lives has been the question of being able to walk down the street with a relative amount of freedom. We want to extend that to every place, the workplace, the hospital, and to control of our lives. That's what revolution means. That's what socialism means. Please join the Socialist Workers' Party, and let's get rid of fascism and also the system that creates it.
I'd like to say thank you for everyone coming to this meeting.